since Pranav has been talking for a while, that's basically the introduction of APPSC. We are a political student collective at IIT Bombay, formed in 2015, and we have been fighting about gender sensitization, unfair, undemocratic practices in campus elections, and most recently against the fee hike here. And we conduct seminars and lectures and events like these, discussion, and most importantly, the reading session, where we take up texts that we discuss. So this is, the campus is different, and it's not like the kind of campus you might have been used to. So I'll just talk briefly about our speakers today, and we'll move to them. So this is a wonderful book collection of essays called Students Won't Be Quiet, published by Leftward Books 2022, and it has been edited by Satarupa Chakraborty and Pindiga Ambedkar. Both of them have been former student activists associated with the Students' Federation of India, and they both currently work with Tricontinental Research. I'll read a paragraph from this book before we move to them. We also have with us Shubhankar Chakraborty, who is a researcher and associated with People's Science Movement in India. He is currently the General Secretary of Bharat Gyan Vigyan Samiti, Karnataka. His primary research is on animal behavior and population genetics. He has worked in several of the Bangalore-based research institutions like IISc, NCBS, and JNCASR. So, in the essays in this book, you'll find writings from student activists, writings of two kinds. One, people have written essays about their own experiences of student activism, and there are interview format essays, which have, so the student leaders interviewed by either of the editors here. So there are writings from Banaras Hindu University, Delhi University, FTII Pune, Hyderabad Central University, Indian Institute of Science Bangalore, Indian Institute of Technology Madras, Jadavpur University, JNU, Pondicherry University, TIS, as well as student struggle in Assam, Kerala, and Himachal Pradesh. And very touchingly, the book has an afterword, which is an interview conversation with the mothers of Najib Ahmed, the student who went missing from JNU, and Rohit Vemula. So I'll just read a quick short paragraph from the introduction written by Satarupa. So describing how the different, so the book also focuses on the period between 2014 to 2019. And she writes, the common threads that join all these events at various campuses are A, the Hindutva assaults, which used an Indian soldier as a symbol of nationalism to simultaneously channel the nationalist sentiment of a larger section of the people, while propagating falsehoods that the students were anti-soldier and hence anti-national, and thus seeking to project the RSS and its affiliates as the only nationalist forces. And B, the attacks on debate and dialogue on the campuses, because debate and dialogue produce critical thinking and argumentative students. Therefore, the RSS was hell-bent on creating a class of individuals who would care less about society and its peoples or their fundamental human rights. The attacks were organized so that the Hindutva right wing could take control of the campuses once they were depoliticized. So I welcome you all to a depoliticized campus, and let's hear from you.
So I will actually try to sort of give a little bit of idea about why this book and so on. But before that, I'm We are like really glad to be here today amongst you. This is my first visit in IIT Bombay campus, and really very glad to be with all of you in a very different sort of setup and different campus where you have formed Ambedkar Phule Periyar Study Circle and have given us this opportunity to share some thoughts around this book and also beyond this book on the student issues on higher education in different campuses. When we have been having a few discussions in different campuses about this book since last few days, and everywhere the first question comes is on the title, that why this title. So this title, as you can see, that it's more than just a title of a book, is almost like a political statement. So why did we choose this title? Choosing of this title also actually put us in a little difficult position, because when we want to have a book discussion in any place, it is quite hard to get permission from the authorities or administration. Is that book discussion is somewhat a holy activity in most of the campuses. At the moment they see the title of this book, they kind of like put the resistance and no, this is a political book and so on. Precisely, this is a political book, and this is a political statement that we are making. Why we are making this political statement is because in this period that you are doing.
No, I'm Ambedkar.
Okay. So as he was saying that this book primarily captures the student voices, student struggles between the period 2014 and 2019. And in this particular period, if we try to see the emergence of student politics in India, in Indian campuses, there is a little bit of distinction between how the student politics have been before 2014. Although the nature of assault on higher education, the nature of assault on student politics have some commonalities, yet between this particular period there has been a little bit of difference. What are the difference? We see that 2014 is a period when there is a government which comes with basically highlighting people's aspirations as a positive sort of agenda which they are basically trying to offer to the society. When this happens, alongside there is also a narrative that gets built that the youth of this country has essentially voted in favor of this sort of politics which the present ruling dispensation is promoting. So this was a positive beginning on the part of the government, coming up with lot of promises, lot of agenda which is very aspirational from the youth's point of view. However, when the shift of power happens in 2014, we see that the first target begins by attacking the students' core right, is on the fellowship. So if you remember, in 2015, there was a UGC order which basically scrapped the non-net UGC fellowship. Now, many of you probably will not be availing this scholarship, but you would understand the need of this fellowship because most of the central universities and state universities, the research scholars actually get this fellowship, not all, but majority of them. In our university, all of them used to get this fellowship, and because this fellowship was there, the sustenance of research was possible. So if you say, look at the data and do a comparison between campuses where there is no fellowship and there are campuses where there are fellowship, you will also find that there is a stark difference in the dropout rates in research courses. In PSU, JNU, where people have availed this scholarship, there were actually very few dropouts in the research courses. They could complete the research. So at that particular point, when the aspiration, students' youth's aspiration was being made as the focus of the election campaign agenda and so on and so forth, we see that the first thing they do is basically crushing students' and youth's aspiration and dreams. Because without this fellowship, which is being availed by majority of the students, many of the students, particularly from the socio-economically deprived background, will not be able to pursue the research. Now, why this research is important? If we study the nature of campuses in across India, we would see that the research students have a very big role in shaping the student politics also of those campuses, because they have a fairly long period of time in those campuses. They also have, like, because of the study and the time they are able to spend, they also kind of come up with considered opinions, with matured views and political ideological understanding and so on. And therefore it is also it also plays a very big supportive role in advancing the students' politics, students' agitation in campuses. The moment you basically crush this section of the researcher, large section of the researcher from these campuses, then the conditioning of the students by adopting certain rules which comes following the neoliberal policies, it becomes much easier. So in this particular period, when there was this huge protest of 90 days in Delhi, and it was also followed by several protests in different state UGC headquarters, we see that government had to go on a back foot, and they ultimately had to revert back on this particular attempt to scrap the UGC non-TERS fellowship. Now, there was another agenda which was being forwarded at that point of time from the government's part, that, well, if you are meritorious, then why not you write the UGC JRF exam, qualify JRF, and then you pursue your research with fairly good amount of money. But again, if you see the ratio of students who are aspirants, who are pursuing research, and the number of fellowship that they give, there is almost like, there is no proportion, there is no match. In such a situation, the student voices becomes very important. The role that the student played at that time to make education as a central agenda, and this becomes central agenda not only that the students were fighting. It is also an agenda where a rallying larger section of the society along with this demand is possible. So, for example, in this book, in introduction, I have written a short story that when we were in the Occupy UGC movement, a father who was an employee of some bank, he used to see us always sitting there. So beginning, he used to come and question us that why you guys are sitting here all day, all night, and do you not have your study and so on. So we started engaging with him in a dialogue that this is what is our demand, and our fellowship is being scrapped and so on. Then he says that, well, my son wants to do a PhD, he wants to go to a university. He was very small at that time, but he has this aspiration. So eventually he becomes actually a person who is in strong solidarity with our protest. So what I mean to say is this, that education and the central demand of education becomes one major point along with which you can actually rally the larger sections of the society. Now this becomes a very big challenge for the ruling party that we are seeing in power, because if that becomes the central demand, if those fundamental demand becomes the central demand of the society and a large number of society participate in it, then they cannot advance questions of communalism, question of caste division, which is basically ruining or demolishing people's fundamental rights. So they needed to create a diversion in order to make the students enemy of the society, in a way that the student protests or student demands become isolated issues. And that's exactly what has happened when very calculatedly attacks were launched in different campuses on different issues. For example, all these campuses, I am not naming all these campuses, these are all documented here, that JNU, ACU, all of them are urban Naxals or anti-national. So you bring the emotional issues in the forefront, create a sentiment that these sections of the society, these students are basically breaking the integrity of the nation. And by steering this sentimental question, you make the struggle fragmented. But very uniquely in this particular period, they tried to create a perception. They were successful towards an extent to create a sort of perception from the larger society to make this students as anti-national and anti-nationals and so on. But what happened is this, that many of the campuses where there were no protests or no history of protest, they became more active because they found that these are all ridiculous claims. So this was basically why we thought that the documentation of this period is important, is this, that this history would just disappear. Even 5-6 years down the line, when we interact with students now, we see that many of them actually don't understand the nuances of this period's history. So that's one thing. The other thing, that when we were doing the research on this book, we found that students' politics in India particularly is not a recent thing. It has a long history. And many states, many universities, old universities, have had very strong student resilience. But those records are not really to be found anywhere. Some pamphlets, some booklets are there in some of the regional languages, but those are not largely accessible. So we thought, if this particular period is a very central period in the whole Indian political landscape, where students are playing a very major role, that needs a documentation. And therefore we of course could not cover all the protests that happened in India, because a volume with all the protests in India is actually impossible to be conceived. But we have taken some of those which could build a sort of larger question of why education is important. What is the role of education in order to create critical intellectuals, and what role the critical intellectuals will play in terms of national building. So these questions become the central question, which all of these protests, maybe they haven't articulated in the terms that I am speaking, but their own local demands, the way those have become national demand, were actually formulating the question of what should be our idea of India, our idea of university, and the relationship of a citizen, a responsible citizen with their university, with their larger society. Because when we are also witnessing a heavy assault of neoliberal policies, it is not to be only seen in terms of economic, policy. It is breaking our society bit by bit. Why I am saying it is breaking our society is because it is very easy that if you get conditioned that you are under always pressure that you go to an institute only for a mere degree, and the result of this degree is for you to somehow settle, get a job somewhere. If that becomes your primary focus, then you don't really care if there is a case of caste discrimination or gender violence around your pedigree. You just think that, I am safe, it's not coming to me, so why should I really bother? And when you are saying depoliticization or the so-called apolitical, these characteristics actually come from the political tenets that I am saying. That a dialogue is missing, the space for dialogue is missing. When we are saying that, why are you closing down a canteen for until midnight or library till midnight? Because those places become not only a place where you just go and eat and where you go and study. Those spaces become essentially a center of learning. And it is very much part of our pedagogic practice that makes us human. So, in a way, in universities, in campuses, where there is, large sort of scope for deliberation between the students, between the faculties, and so on, you see that the outcome, the knowledge production in those places is somewhat different. The nature of the campus becomes little different. And this difference is only because the spaces make people come to a situation of battle of ideas which the universities and all higher education should actually promote. And that's not something that we are saying for the first time. Even in the history of modern education institution building, that was one of the primary objectives, that the higher educational institutions should be a place of battle of idea and free exchange of thoughts. If those are being obstructed by authoritarian assault, by neoliberal policies and so on, then it is an imperative on the part of students to actually question. And when we are saying students won't be quiet, is a statement that the students, even after this heavy pressure, even after this huge scale of conditioning, there have been resilience. So there is one sociologist whom we came across during the study, who was basically arguing about how the student's character is essentially revolutionary. That you can suppress them for a bit, you can condition them for a bit, but you cannot actually condition the whole section of the student community for a long period of time and make them silent. Those periods, because each individual students in all the campuses, yesterday we were in IIT, FTI Pune. So in all these campuses, if you see, those who were involved in the struggles, all of them had to pay a cost. Some people have gone to jail, some people have, gone and some people were suspended and so on. All of them had to bear a cost. Rohit Vemula's colleague, Donta Prashant's interview is there. He was suspended along with Rohit Vemula and so on. So all of us actually individually had to pay that cost. But whether our collective was ready for giving us this support so that we become or we form a community which are fighting for a cause and which is actually putting us question against the mighty state. That's the role the students have performed. Because obviously, all other sections of the society, for example, farmers, workers, different sections, women, all of them have actually started raising questions and so on. But the first attack really began on the students, and the first major articulation against this adamant government also came from the students. So the other thing that I would like to actually mention here is this, that in this particular period, a few things also have come to the forefront with some uniqueness, in the sense that the question of caste. We know that there is this whole study of Professor Thorat about studying the aims, the discrimination in aims and so on. We have been knowing that in campuses, the students from the marginalized communities were being suffocated, which leads to end of their life. And this has happened in multiple occasions. Some of those were reported in media, but in this particular period, the students' protest articulated something which was to term these instances as institutional murder. Before that, it was not articulated. Institutional murder, because if the structural discrimination becomes the cause for a student, a young scholar's death, and that becomes a sort of normalcy in different campuses, it creates hegemony. It becomes normal. Everybody is fine with it, that such a thing is happening and everybody is okay with it. This structure also needs a challenge. And these student protests have actually articulated, particularly the Hyderabad Central University protests, that these are institutional murders. The other aspect is this, that the gender violence, the rampant gender violence that has been a phenomena in different campuses, is actually making the students feel unsafe in their own campuses. It's like, I am feeling unsafe at my own home. What kind of a university or educational institution are we building if a student does not feel safe at her own home? That's another articulation that came from the students. So this social components that becomes essential, and the student protests make those as some of the fundamental questions that not only the students, not only the academic community, but the larger society should engage with. Because in this period also we see the role of media, which is to also report things in a way so that the larger section of society can participate or think about those questions. There is absolutely a very negative and bad role of the media that we have seen. Recently we have attended this Indian Library Congress, the first Indian Library Congress that happened in Kannur. There renowned journalist N. Ram came, and he was making a distinction between misinformation and disinformation vis-a-vis media. Misinformation is something which is basically, which may be intentional, may not be intentional. But the media in our time has played a role of advancing disinformation, creating falsehood, changing the truth, tempering the truth. So if they play such a role to disorient the society, to make society believe in what is false, then it is our responsibility to advance the real struggle, the truth of the struggle to the society. And that's one of the purpose of this video. I'm not going to extend beyond, because I would like to actually engage with more questions, because I think all of us come from different contexts and the dialogue would be more meaningful than this. So, Ambedkar will speak.
Actually, Satarupa spoke enough and covered all the points. I'll just talk. How many of you are from sociology background here? So, yeah, half the students. So I just talk about we being in a research space. We all are aware what is the role of educational institution. I mean, for sociologists, we are well aware that educational institutions do nothing but reproduce what exists in the society. They're there to reproduce the existing hierarchies and the inequalities. They're not there to, mitigate inequality. They're designed, Bourdieu says, to reproduce the existing inequalities. In his seminal essay, he talks about how, because we are in an IIT, I want to take this example of how certain professions are the preserve of the social elites. In his study on France, he talks about in that context, the lawyers, the engineers, so on and so forth, were dominated by whites. I mean, it's obviously a white majoritarian society, but even in that, there are different hierarchies among those social groups. He talks about a particular, the Italians, I think, were having control over the law because that was a very lucrative profession. So on and so forth. Even in India, we see that educational institutions still, continue to be the preserve of the social elites of the country. And the other name being the so-called twice-born castes, where, say, IITs, medical institutions, the dominant control is because of them. They hold control. Why do they hold control? Because they know that in unequal societal cause, education is the only avenue for social mobility. Through economic mobility, you get that social mobility. So that they prevent it because they have been having control over our thought process, and they know that if they control the educational institutions, they can prevent social mobility, because in our country, we have not seen a major upsurge from the working class and the lower classes to bring about equality. We ourselves gave ourselves a document which we thought will bring a radical transformation if implemented in letter and spirit, but that has not been done. For example, I can give you the example of IITs. We all might be not aware that reservations for SC/ST students, though existed with the coming of the constitution as a policy, were only introduced in IITs in 1970s. So for a whole 20 years, the cream was created from the so-called twice-born, so that they go outside and control institutions, and their thought process is there. For 2 generations, you prevent cream from the different communities not being created. So when recruitment happens, you don't find them, not found, right? So all the jobs that go vacant, what happens? Those are converted into general category, and their control goes on. I'm very thankful for having come here, because I was very impressed with Professor D. Parthasarathiy's paper on reservations and merit. He introduced a very important concept, DiMaggio's, of institutional isomorphism. That is the crux of this twice-born. How they control the educational institutions is they create a habitus which is convenient for the people who come from their thought process, or who are socialized in their values. For example, people who come through reservations, or who come from a rural or regional medium of instruction, they are not welcome in any higher education institution, because the education institutions are created not to welcome you. They are created to make you feel uncomfortable, so that you don't realize your full potential. And that's what comes then. How do students become political? I don't know if there's something political that happens. It's just a transformation, it's discussion. Why am I doing badly? We all come in a group and realize that our teacher is talking in a language we don't understand. That becomes a talking point. Then we petition the teacher to, use non-jargonic language, or make the language simpler so that everybody participates. Then that some teachers see it as politics, but we see it as our democratic right. So that's all I want to say, that students want to be quiet means they discuss and debate, and that becomes a rallying point of asking for their demands. That's all. Yeah, I mean, in the question answer session, I will talk about, because in this we have already covered about discrimination, non-implementation of reservations, everything that we all are aware, because you are a research student, so there is no point in reintroducing what you already know. Yeah.
But I would request you to speak a little bit about the processes of building movements a bit, with reference to United Ultras struggle and so on. Because
Alright, yeah. Also, maybe I'd also want to talk about, since she already talked about the battle of ideas, I would want to talk about why how many of you are first generation learners here? I mean, higher education, who are doing research. It's almost all of us. Yeah, so what is our role then? We are intellectuals, and want to bring in Gramsci's idea of, or their role of intellectuals in society. He says that every class, I mean, he's talking from the Italian society perspective, that every class produces its own intellectuals which propagate the class interest. Say, for example, in India, the twice born sections have intellectuals who are there even in our educational institutions to preserve their interest, self-interest, right? They fail students, they harass students because they know if they make it democratic, then there is a challenge for them. So they are playing their role, the traditional intellectuals. Even our intellectuals from the deprived communities, they are also fighting the battle to further the interests of the working class or the marginalized sections. And it is here that it becomes very important that we are in a situation where there is a requirement for new intellectual, because we see around that in our political spectrum or sphere, the role the intellectuals playing in addressing the people has been reduced quite significantly. I mean, if we just take the organization's name, we have Ambedkar, Periyar, Phule Study Circle. Do we have those thinkers who are leading the movements outside? I don't think the movements from, leaving out a few movements from the deprived background, say for example, Tamil Nadu we have Tirumavalan, but in other places there is a dearth of organic intellectuals who are talking about radically transforming the society. There's a dearth, definitely. And Gramsci talks about the role of new intellectuals. We all are students, we are doing research which might concern the society at large. So he says that it is important that we be part of the movement, join them, amplify their voice and become permanent persuaders. Because it's only through convincing others that we win over any politics, right? Even if the BJP has come here because they have created an ideology that they are building a so-called Hindu society which is unifying all the Hindus. But that's a false propaganda. We all are aware, but they are able to convince. But we have, on the other side, we have not been able to demystify their myths, because we have also been caught in the battle of emotions, because we become very defensive when they talk about issues of, like she talked about emotional issues of nationalism, attacks on religious minorities. We become very defensive because somehow we are not voicing our opinions amongst ourselves and also among the larger public. Yeah, that I think we all should become more political. Being more political means becoming, starting more discussion forums and talking out or writing. That's always my request to you, because people will think, coming from a university where student activism is more vibrant, we don't do anything other than what you are doing. We just voice our opinion and we come as a group and make demands. That's all. Yeah. And I want to also, because you are a student organization, we have documented how movements are built. That's a very important thing for us, because not all have been trained in student activism from our undergraduate days. So here we have an issue of United Andhra Pradesh where during the emergency period, the government officers from the progressive sections, progressive government officers, they started, the government started taking control of the privately run caste hostels. Before, there existed a lot of hostels where students from SC/ST backgrounds were housed in private accommodation, because most of them are from rural background and they didn't have space, and educational institutions then were mostly in towns and cities. So staying became a problem. So those hostels were run privately by educated people from the communities themselves. So when the emergency period came, they used that executive power to, for the government to take control of all these hostels, and they ensured that a generation of students from the SC/ST, OBC communities and general communities who were in these hostels got access to education at a very, very minimal cost. And obviously, because of the neoliberal policies which pushed the governments to reduce the spending, first things that were affected were the social welfare hostels where the students from deprived backgrounds studied. You'll be shocked to know that the everyday mess allowance for them during that period was 15 rupees, 20 rupees per day for 3 meals. So in those hostels were majorly run by students, they used to only have 2 meals a day. So there is no education with dignity that was happening. So then what the Students' Federation of India and Andhra Pradesh did was, they surveyed all the government hostels. They found out what was the problem, what was required. They made a memorandum. They then first, like what Dr. Ambedkar said, that you approach authorities first. So they went and petitioned all the government district headquarters officers that please grant us funds so that students can study. But obviously, you know that they don't create avenues for us to get educated, right? They want us to be cheap labor. Before we were agricultural laborers, now they want us to be working in the shop floor as literate workers, because we need literacy to read the instructions to operate the machinery, or to even operate or type for the faculty whom we are assisting. But they didn't want us to become officers or thinkers. Then the students, then whole of the state agitated at the district headquarters, and when their demands were not met, they came to the capital of Andhra Pradesh, United Andhra Pradesh. Then they protested, sat on a hunger strike, and the government was forced, because it became a moral question for the society. Because how can you prevent students from not eating? Like Satarupa was saying, what the current government did was to paint the students as anti-national so that there is no societal support for their demands. But then there was a huge support from the different sections of the society, and the government was forced to pass whatever were the demands, and the government passed the GO for appointing all the officers, wardens, appointing new workers to the hostels, and new hostels were created. So that's how, if we study a problem and scientifically if we are interested, that we lead it to a logical end, we can do it. But what happens, because we are not part of a student organization, we tend to be also at times ad hoc in our demands, because we think that being radical, radical is not the word, being very vocal about our opinion or our demands in front of the administration, they will listen, they won't listen. You have to be very strategic and see that you win over the community and be the permanent persuaders, all of you. I'm sure you'll make IIT a democratic and a better place. Yeah, thanks.
You also have Shubhankar here. Would you like to speak briefly about the essay you have written in the book, or about your work culture?
Yeah, very briefly.
You can sit there and be easier to understand.
It's more convenient for the camera.
Maybe like.
No, you can sit there.
Fine. how much time do I have? 5 minutes? 10
You
minutes?
can 10 minutes. You can.
10 minutes. So I actually feel very much warmly welcome in a depoliticized campus, as Amar Khan said. But you know, the question therefore is also that isn't the depoliticized campus an oxymoron? Since, I mean, of course, since all of you are there, there is no depoliticized campus. I mean, and if you are not there, if Ambedkar Periyar Phule Study Circle is not there, would the campus become depoliticized? Then it leads to this question that, you know, what essentially is political? What is a political campus? So the measure for political campuses are largely the presence or absence of students' organizations and elections of the student organizations, or staff unions, workers unions, teachers unions, teachers association, or absence of them, largely, as in popular parlance it is. But then politics is a practice. By that, what I argue here is that it is like science is a practice, like sociology is a practice, like any other vocation, like carpentry is a practice, politics is a practice. Politics do not emerge anywhere without a practice, right? And if such is so, the absence of certain structures or the absence of certain methods, does it establish the absence of the practice? So to me, it is not. But again, like say, it depends possibly also that what is this practice aspiring to? If a practice aspires to be status quoist, then it would be essentially some methods it has to create to be status quoist. For example, we all know after French Revolution, which had this slogan of what was the slogan? Liberty, equity, fraternity, and all. And it shook. It's a revolution. It's not like the fake revolution that we hear all the time about glorious revolution of England in our textbooks. It's not that. So, but what it gave is that after French Revolution, it took 150 years for half of their population to be eligible to be a voter. Women were not allowed to vote in France, even after 150 years of French Revolution. So where does equality? Yes. So there was a status quo in that equality, sense of equality. And the things that already all of you have mentioned is that there is a status quo of the people who are largely in the power and all. But then there is also movements which are inside the campus, which are outside the campus, which are in the larger social training. So what I want to mention is that I worked for some time in Indian Institute of Science, and it's been one of those elite institutions. So it's a book about that, but it was not conceptualized like that. So as a elite institution as such, it was part of the anti-colonial struggle. The aspiration of that, the aspiration of IIT was part of the anti-colonial struggle, you know. But when we are coming here largely, or when the discourses are there popular parlance, it's been dissociated from anti-colonial struggle. There was a committee of NR Sarkar committee was formed in 1945, which gave its recommendations in 1948 to, and it notes that, you know, the engineering education is very important for nation building, quote unquote, or to challenge the colonial and anti-colonial structures, because it's also the mode of production. It's entering directly in the mode of production, like engineering education. And there it is saying that it is so, the quality of the education or the training is abysmal at that time and all. But at the same time, when these reports were coming and possibilities of forming national institutions like Indian Institute of Technology, at that time, Nazir Ahmed, scientists like Nazir Ahmed or Meghnad Saha had warned. They warned that these institutions should not be in isolation of the public universities, or we are going to lose people. And that was a warning from practicing scientists, from the people who were part of the, they were not part of, now it is very easy for, we can say that you are a sociologist. So if we build you as a sociologist, you are virtually a statue I can build around you and all. Where the statue stands, but the Statue of Unity, you can stand as a statue. But you won't be a public intellectual, as he was pointing out. For us, it was very much an important issue, and that was being pointed out. So then, therefore, the question that comes, which we had also dealt with, I give two few stories. That what happens to these campuses which don't have student organizations or elections in student organization. The Constitution gives us rights for formation of the association everywhere. This is one of the rights that cannot be contested as long as this Constitution is there in the country. But then we don't have that rights in various places. Also, the elections are not there. But then what happens is that, but there are students, there are teachers, and they are not isolated from society. So, for example, there's a student organization, small student organization like APPSC, that was formed during the Narmada Bachao Andolan in IISc, named Concern. And the student organization organized a film screening of Anand Pattabardhan's Ram Ke Naam, the phenomenal movie Ram Ke Naam. And just before the 2000, on the demolition of the Babri Masjid, before 2014 election. 2014 election was around the corner, the buzz was around, and so on and so forth. And it never happened so that, generally people come and watch. But there were vandals who were students and all. So how do we negotiate that? So there is a story around how actually, so this is a narrative. When they protested, the students came and said that you cannot scream. There were people who were keep on talking and all. How did students manage that? Because it is important to scream. It's not, people have come to disrupt. The people who were partly aligned with the ideas of ABVP or RSS, they were dissuaded in a manner that was not, fortunately, that didn't lead to that. But what happened is that around the same time, so it's why I'm saying there's a politics is a practice, because there is a one incident, then there is another incident, then there is another incident. They are not in isolation, they are kind of a thread that connects. So after that, what happened? Around 2015, 14, 15, there was this mass hike. So students went in large scale protest in that, like similar situation here. There these questions also come. So therefore the questions like, say for example, which we may think innocuous, that what is a slogan? What slogan can we do? Can all of us give slogans? It's not very easy. Coming up with a slogan, it's a creative work. It's not for all of us. And it's also, there is inhibition. When we start giving slogans, then we slowly start finding the rhythm, we start understanding, we start having an articulation of what in academia wants us to do actually. If you are writing a paper, they would say that make the abstract such a way that is understandable for a general reader. We make the slogan such a way that is understandable for people. And then also that, so those things started coming. Then there was also an issue that is there possibly here. So these are broadly can be categorized as both assault by the Hindutva politics and assault by the neoliberal sections, the capitalist agenda in education, what Satarupa was mentioning. So there is this organization named Art of Living and all. There is a private business house which has a facade of being helping people for their various kind of issues that should be handled by the doctors, by the psychologists, by the people who are trained to help people actually. So they set up this shop inside IISc. And shop means like they set up their thing in a very convoluted manner. So they would have in the messes some of this, their meditation and whatever. So then the students' bodies were not like asking any question largely, because they thought that it's innocuous thing. They thought that it is none of their business. But then after these events, slowly what was happening is that during the mess issue also, and these are connected issues. See, the mess issue, the increase of fees, the increase of mess bills and so on, the privatization of mess. So we have tried to document these, that how these protests emerged in this particular book. And we could see that this is the fallout of neoliberal policies. The people who are apathetic or supporting the mess hike increase, a large section of it were also the vandals who were coming and stopping Anand Patwardhan's movie screen and all. But it is not a kind of a direct, correlation, but this correlation existed and all. Subsequently, when these sections of students who were saying that why you are having Art of Living campus, where they are charging students and all, then they went, Art of Living guys went in a very, so this is a similar bunch of students, and they just came in a direct attack. Around that time, the student council election was, I'm talking about 2015, around that time. And in this particular, so we tried to document some of this, what happened in the student election, what are the agendas they fought. And the student election happened in these years as a Art of Living camp, which had put up a panel, and the people who were not with the so-called. And it was fortunate that the entire of this camp has been defeated in the election, and they came to the union. Even after when they came to the union, there was a harassment of the general secretary at that time, who was very strong, stood very firmly in these issues. So these are some of the issues that these kind of institutions are facing. So the questioning obscurantism, questioning this kind of things are very much there in these institutions. But these do not have an organized voice or organized force. There are people also who are established scientists who are collaborators of obscurantism. It wasn't that they were non-collaborators in many places. But then there is certain things expected out of the institutions and all. And these expectations are essentially being, we need to have those demands set, that these are the expectation of an institution. These are the expectation of secularism. These are the expectation of inclusion and all. Here, in this book, we for the first time, we published this data from IISc, the last 40 years of recruitment of faculties and scientific staff in 4 decades of recruitment data. And as APPSC, I have been following APPSC for quite some time now, and you have also collated, you have filed RTIs, you have collated several sources of information you are putting out, and this has actually a lot of implication beyond IIT Bombay. People are reading it in other places. People are seeing these numbers and all, and you are putting out this. So I really want to thank APPSC, not only the APPSC here, also the Ambedkar PDR study circle in Madras, in Gandhinagar also. They have also put out some of this, what is happening in their campuses, and that is very important and all. But in these particular issues, last 4 decades of IISc faculty recruitment, student, though you leave that out, because student, there are some better degree because of reservation they have to follow, but that is also, that is also abysmally low. So when when the academia is saying we are inclusive, unless and until you are inclusive in practice of amending the gatekeeping measures that you have established so far, you are not inclusive. You are far from inclusive. And these gatekeeping measures cannot be only absorbed by putting hashtag like women in STEM. IISc, out of 416 faculties they have recruited who are serving in 2021 July 1st actually, there are only 38 women scientists faculties out of 466. So a abysmal number. Now if we look at the caste recruitments, the last just a very one-liner is that there were out of this women there were only 2 OBC and Dalit women who were there. So gender and caste both looking at. Besides this, there were in 18 out of 466 serving faculties, there were only 12 faculties who were from OBC and 13 faculties from Dalit background. There were 2 Adivasi scientists who were recruited during the period, I am talking of 4 decades period, who are serving in 2021 July 1st. There were 2 Adivasi scientists recruited. One was recruited 14 years back and another was recruited 20 years back. So, so these statistics are there, and it was again the Baba Saheb Ambedkar study circle who were involved people, so which allowed us to also find some of this data and all. Getting this data is also become very difficult. You will know that RTI, filing RTI, getting a response out of RTI, even however very pointed questions we are putting, it's not always very easy for us. So anyway, so these are mainly, I think in this way, these campuses have some similar issues. But then the campuses also have their dreams, and I am sure that students, or generally, we can dream where we sleep. So if we are sleeping in the hostel, we should dream there. If we are sleeping on the street, we should dream there. And if we are sleeping in faculty quarters, we should dream there. So therefore, essentially, these are the parts of it. The dream, as long as it's trying to change this, alter this situation, I think even though there is not an organized student organization, the necessity of it will remain, as well as the resistance of it will also continue. Thank you.
Questions from audience? Questions, comments? Recently there was this conference called Cultures of the Left.
I know.
And it got cancelled a day before it was supposed to happen. And we got an email saying it's been cancelled due to unavoidable circumstances. So the question is, in your experiences of student organization, how often do we come across these mysteriousness that it can't be explained to students, or and how do students deal with this? How do you approach this? Or is it very frequent that the admin doesn't want to tell you, or it's not transparent, or how do we approach such issues, and what has your experience been in terms of dealing with admins in general?
Okay, so it is actually not mysterious. It has been quite a, how I should say, that it's a concerted sort of an attack to stop any sort of discussion. They're nervous when these discussions happen, because in these discussions you have like lot of things that is coming, emerging and so on. Like I'm sure that when we are having this discussion, all of us are having like different ideas and so on, and we go to another place, we get inspired, we start thinking whether we can do something new which can suit our context and so on. This is not specific to only IITs. Even in Central University, in fact, there is a mention in this book about the seminar which was being organized in Haryana Central University during this period, which was basically around the play of Mahashweta Devi. Yeah, and it was also cancelled. And there was this whole, they mobilized hooligans, who would come and attack seminars. In DU, during the Ramjas College incident, which is recorded in this book, the same situation happened. They mobilized hooligans who would come and pelt stone and so on, and then the authority will come up with this narrative that, see, you are organizing, you are the disruptors. Because of your organizing of this seminar, it created problems. It has brought, what you were saying, that a bad reputation on the institution. So the blame is always on those who are basically organizing. The point is that we, and it is happening also in campuses where students are slightly more active in politics. It is happening. Like in our university, we have seen they have suddenly come up with this circular that you can't paste those big posters in JNU. How essential those big posters were in part of political education, political, social, cultural education of a student is something that they don't want to acknowledge and they don't want to encourage. So this has happened. Now in our experience, I could say from our experience of the student organization and so on, that if we leave those spaces, if we become sort of passive when such attacks are happening, then basically it's a win-win situation for the authority. They try and test whether how resilient, how much resistant we are in order to put our demands. If a campus is a place where you hold seminars, if there are dialogues on academic issues and political issues and so on, there are disciplines like Center for Policy Studies, Political Science, Sociology and so on, then you are bound to raise these questions and you are bound to hold seminars and talks on those questions. Why should a campus not be open to this dialogue? What is the fear? So sometimes it happens that we might have to sort of do a sort of physical resistance in order to create alternative space. Okay, you are stopping one seminar, we are going to hold it alternatively. We will find out our own space to hold these seminars. But that initiative is important. When I'm saying this, I know that it's easier said than done. The context that he mentioned, incidentally, I was present in the time when this film screening was happening, and I saw how this whole crowd was being mobilized and so on. It's not easy, but at the same time, because our point is always to rally the larger students also, larger students, faculty, staff, whoever is, whoever are the members of the campus community. So if some section becomes comes under this feeling that okay, it might come to my promotion or my XYZ, my fellowship or something, not everybody is ready to take that cost. We need to also understand this situation. But I don't see actually there is any other way but to put that resistance. where we can create alternative space for dialogue and democratic discussion. Because if we believe that we are not doing anything unconstitutional and undemocratic, we get, everything on our side. Our voice, our struggle, our narrative, everything becomes much more strong, and we should go in campaigning. If they can run a campaign to shut down a university, why not we run a campaign to open more spaces for democratic dialogue and deliberation?
So, as you mentioned Bourdieu here, when I was reading Bourdieu, I was scared. Like the analysis he gives, I saw no space for mobility in it, like the reproduction you were talking about. Here, when we speak of education, there is one sense that education provides some space for socio-economic mobility. But again, there is this other thought that even in that space, there are a lot of limitations. Right?
Yes.
As you said, that they are merely many times working as sites for reproduction of inequality.
That's the intention.
Yeah. So my question is, what role student politics play in this character of public education as spaces of mobility or as spaces of mere reproduction of inequalities?
Right.
Yeah. So what role student politics, how important student politics is to decide that character?
Yeah. All right. She wanted to ask something. Okay. See, obviously, education is a tool for mobility. There's no doubt about it. If it is independent of any control, but we all know that everywhere the social elites don't want to let that control go. They don't want others to they don't want to give membership to others to join the club. In that situation, students, because from the faculty side, the representation is very limited, it's the students who have to voice out opinions and create avenues. I can give the example of the experiments that the Savitribai Phule Pune University did through the Women's Studies Center and JNU as well, where students from, obviously we all need a bridge course, right? Because if only students who studied in, say, honors degrees during their undergraduation, they will be well versed with the academic debates that are being taught to us. But others, everybody definitely needs a bridge course to catch up with the rest of the class. So these are things what students can do in the absence of faculty who are not receptive. Because we all know in IITs, especially when I interviewed or read the literature of students, BTech students, there are teachers blatantly discriminating students, saying you don't deserve to be here. But that is when the student activism comes into picture, that you form study groups, you help students so that they become part of the general class discussions and their confidence levels grow. Because at the end of the day, we have to ensure that everybody finishes their degree, because we know there are systems that create students to drop out. So student organization like yours and the student bodies should ensure that, actually IIT Bombay had actually experimented with a training from the institute from Trivandrum of inviting students from SC/ST backgrounds 1 month in advance and giving them access to communication skills and so on and so forth. It was IIT Delhi, but the labeling of it was wrong, because I interviewed students who were part of the training process. They didn't need much time in catching up with the rest of the students because they arrived 1 month prior to the general students, got enough cultural capital. That's all I'm trying to say. That in any elite spaces, you need cultural capital to survive. How do you talk to somebody? How do you make a presentation? How do I quote? suppose I'm reading from a book, many are not aware that I start by quoting, saying I'm quoting and then end of quote. All these things, if you can provide as alternates for students to pick up, because these are not part of traditions for first generation students, and be it the case of somebody facing difficulty in accessing scholarships and all, these are things the administration will not have a moral upper hand over you. So I think these are things that you can take up to politicize the students. I mean, what? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, just two question or maybe some kind of comment you can see. First, generally the kind of discussion we do around student activism here is about the celebration of the student activism, the more celebratory aspect of the student activism, to create the space more democratic, considering the kind of difficult space it is to operate in the political sense. But now when we are like doing a much more student movement, nuanced discussion. So just one thing. So there is a more reflection and a criticism of the way the student movement is functioning. So we see that there is a huge dropout at the level of 10th, matric, 12th, then the graduate, and now they have introduced FYP, various procedures where actually you can kick out very gently. So at this time, when very limited number of students can access the university space, how important or how limited the university space has become to sustain the to sustain the student movement in conversation with political movement which is happening outside the university. And there is a tendency among the student movement to limit, so operating in this language of creating more dialogue spaces and etc., which are very important. But at the same time, getting more into that dialogue trajectory has its own problem. It diverges from the other movements which are happening. I remember the JNU PI movement. When the JNU PI movement was happening, there are like other movements started too. Like in Pathalgadi, there was movement for library. Like in Bihar, like in Patna, like there were few student activities started from the various unorganized groups and etc. So it obviously the central university and the elite campuses in which we are operating is the kind of exposure it gives to the other. It inspires, but at the same time they are also very hostile to us. They see us with all hostility. So how to maintain this gap? How to like bring more penetrate into the society, more like creating. And it's a difficult task. Like we all are like doing PhD and etc. So it's very difficult to sustain this life if we are pursuing activism. This is one thing: how to dialogue and how to dialogue with the society in general. And the second question about the vulnerability as who are involved in a activist process goes through. So, and it is not homogeneous. It has its varied forms. Like what I have observed in the recent few years, I have never seen any women coming from marginalized background or like coming from a more sober economic background. There are women who come largely trained from the political family, like coming from the CPA, CPI, etc., joining SFI. Or other political outfits of student group, or other women who are like who is theoretically more charged up and joined with all the. But I have never seen women joining with all like a very limited exposure to political activities which you do, organizing events and etc. So that women are very reluctant, and it reflects something. It reflects that our processes which we are doing is actually not making contribution to their life. It is always about very limited people who are doing some limited activity, and they have their own life too. Like when the protest ends, some people go to party and some people have no friends at all. and this has this caste dynamics too. So in such then there is a distinction of which is increasing. It's social experience and the university experience. Some people when graduate, like when I was in BA, most of the people went to study abroad and etc. And there are some people who have no life after the graduation. How difficult for them to take up activism though they are very much exposed to the progressive values and want to take part into that, but they are unable to do that. How to deal with such situation, or how you are seeing to such questions?
There are many things in your question. Take the example of IIT. Predominantly, it's a undergraduation institution, right? So during undergraduation in any colleges, for that matter, professional colleges, there is hardly any time other than your academics to indulge in events outside your campus. IITs in general, because of a lot of students harming themselves, introduced certain cultural events. It was by design to so-called de-stressing events that were introduced so that they have some creative output or outburst that it was needed. So expecting engineering college to be politically having a political conversation with the society outside is difficult, according to me. Though if you have student organizations, it would be easier because then you can rationalize who goes and interacts and gets some things or participates in protests outside. But in a professional college, it becomes very difficult structurally. But then with the coming of MTech and PhD students, the scenarios in IITs are also changing, because these are students who have time with themselves that they can voice out opinions about the things that are happening around them. And they have also the maturity to deal with administration on a sustained form, because don't take me otherwise, if there is no organization that takes up an issue, for individual students to deal with the administration becomes very difficult. You might do it twice, thrice, but you are tired and again you start from afresh. But if there are organizations that are created with whatever resources are available in form of PhD students, I think these spaces can be made politically vibrant in the sense of creating aware students. That's all it matters for me. Being a politically active campus for me means I don't expect that we in large numbers go take part in a protest. It's not necessary. Maybe once in 6 months when the farmers have come to Bombay, you expected students to go and give solidarity when they were walking barefoot, the Adivasi farmers. Those are different things. But on a regular basis to go and join every protest outside, I think it's not even healthy for student community as well. This is my personal opinion. And coming to the issue of women students not being active, in this volume we have Satarupa will talk more in detail about the experience of BHU and Pondicherry Central University. How issues make students politically active, and about the students who after undergraduation want to join a movement and so on and so forth. Obviously, it's a challenge for people when there are no organizations around. But I want to say that if somebody wants to start an organization or work on certain issues, there are many avenues that are available. I can just give you an example of Maharashtra VR and the Nalanda Academy. Have you heard about the Nalanda Academy? That's started by a few individuals who are interested in contributing to the progress of the education of the marginalized sections. So there are avenues. It's just a matter of what issue you want to take up. If you want to become a political activist, you can approach. It's an individual's pull. that we can't say that we will create avenues and we expect. I'm sure in Bharat Jodo he's calling people to come. Whoever wants to be politically active to join them, you should tell your friends who after undergraduation want to do politics to join the Yatra and see what they can go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll take 10 more minutes.
We can go till 1, I guess. 10,
We can go.
Yeah, unless someone comes and there is
No, no.
Yeah.
I think 10 minutes, a couple of
Other
questions.
programs should be so.
Yeah, that is fine.
Yeah.
I have 2-3 questions actually in that way. We all know like there are some like few universities, few campuses which always makes news, right? And there is also kind of defame and destroy going from government side, right? Just keep a badnaam karwa. So in case of these are few universities actually, but when it comes to state universities, which are actually sandwiched between these UGC policies and the state government act, University Act, right? Where there are more local issues. And do you really think or observe in this documentation process? I would like to hear if you have observed so. Like, for example, when these universities have their local issues, right, which are due to their University Act or be it because of the local and the state government decisions or any kind of thing, where there are more local issues, okay, and when student movements, we always see student movement as an anti-establishment character, right? They are always vocal about new liberal policies and very ideological thing. And there is also a categorization of student movement like norm-oriented and the value-oriented. And we all have observed it since anti-mandal, anti-mandal kind of things where the student completely came for certain cause, and then that kind of right-wing, polarization is also happening till now, and it's happening and it's more accelerated after 2014. So, do you really think this kind of local issues is a cause for right-wing organization to take it up, to consider, and then to go for it, right? Because I have observed in many state universities, I come from state university, so even that these are remote location universities which are nowhere, they don't care about their ranking, and these are like only university by, so these universities where local issues are important, but that are not being considered by this kind of student organization, because they have to struggle at both level. One is with administration, second is with the policy and the establishment, and third is with the local issues. So local issues are become either, do you really think or do you really observe that there are some universities in India where local issues became important? Like fee hike and all, though we all knew these are very important, but other local issues.
So, it's actually a very nice question. We have faced this problem in our university also. There has been a trend of politics in our university which has created a sort of a environment where the students have to always go outside protest, which he was mentioning. That was important. Like the students have to debate about what is going on in Palestine, for example, the repression of people's right in Palestine. Those things have to come. But what is the task of a student organization or a student union is basically to fulfill the mandate and the aspiration of the students who are presently there in a particular campus. When we talk about neoliberal issue or neoliberal policy, because of the fund cut, our tuition fee is increasing. Because of the fund cut, we are not getting fellowship. These are some of the visible things. But the more invisible thing is that if your water cooler does not get serviced on regular basis, and because of this reason you fall sick often, and that hampers your education, you get to take medical leave and so on and so forth, your grade falls. There is a direct link of that neoliberal policy to your very core and so-called small issue of water cooler. So if a student organization really has to fight a larger battle, it cannot fight a larger battle in an abstract term. it has to concretize its battle and grounded its battle on a very, small, minute and local issues. And these are the things that are happening actually in many universities. That he was telling that we visited MG University and so on. So in MG University there was also one strike of women.
13 women.
30 women.
13.
So a bunch of women actually started a protest against hostel rule. What was the hostel rule? That you can't go outside your hostel after a certain time. So they started protest. The immediate reaction of the campus, even from progressive quarters, was very conservative. And that was actually against the extending of the hostel time. But they persisted. They did not back off because there was a large sentiment which was going against this particular demand, because they were very sure about the rightfulness of that demand. So what eventually happened was, the hostel time increased. There was also some 24, library timing, hostel timing, everything increased. It essentially made the campus more democratized. Women are now more free. Sometimes it comes with the question of whether they are safe after a certain point of time in the campus, because there are not enough security guards. And in MG University we had, there were this problem of the roads, like outsiders entry through the campus, and there were some incidents. Now these are the incidents. If somebody talks on those terms, these are logical questions, that how to make the campus more better with catering to this kind of problem. Those are negotiations, those are logical conversations that you can proceed. But if somebody says that it is not a valid demand, because why should women go out after 6 o'clock when it is dark, then it needs a much more fundamental and ideological resistance.
I'd actually want to add on to what Satarupa was saying. How they won over the debate, though we all are in a patriarchal society, and that 6 o'clock curfew was taken for granted, but the students there presented that male students are sitting in the library more than us. They are doing lab work more than us. How can we be equal or compete with the male students? That I don't think anybody can prevent, right? You are not allowing women students to spend more time in library or in laboratories. So how will they then perform on par with the male students? I think that clinches the debate. Then the question of arranging security is a secondary. You're first preventing equal learning space for women students. So if these are the arguments that come about, I don't think anybody can prevent equal participation of students. Yeah, that way I think they clinch the debate, because security becomes a secondary issue. It's just a matter of allocating more security guards and adjusting your budget. Yeah, but the point is your arguments have to convince others. Yeah.
No, but what I am saying is that in our time, what we have witnessed in last say 4-5 years, is that there is no space for this debate also. In JNU, when they came up with this circular to dismantle the Gender Sensitization Committee Against Sexual Harassment, we had a very consistent and logical argument to provide. But the administration just did not listen. They were not in terms with coming to a discussion and dialogue. In such a situation, as a method of resistance at that point of time, when the first year it happened, it could not continue because of a lot of factors. But at the first level of resistance, we thought, okay fine, you want to dismantle the GS cash, you want to formulate ICC, which will be a puppet body for the administration. We will, do the procedure of alternative election, and the whole GS cash election was conducted by the students alone. huge number of students. That was never recognized as an official body. But the point is that at that point of time, this particular action was very important to state that, you know, we are not coming down to your terms. There will be this fight and resistance within the university.
Yeah,
And last thing, yeah.
Since we're talking about like having organizations in a college which makes it political, I was also thinking about how a lot of times when we have organizations which just limit themselves to a certain university, it becomes difficult to learn from the experience of other universities and other student movements and organizations, right? And wherein the role of larger organizations or like larger coordinating organizations comes in. Because that's an, I think, issue we also faced during the fee hike movement, where, for instance, in a place like JNU or in a place like HCU or whatever, it's taken for granted that you have solidarity from different organizations, and that's what makes these movements bigger and more important. But in a place like IIT, a lot of times the sort of dilemma that student movements have sometimes is to accept solidarity or not from outside. Because here the notion is that, you know, the social fabric is different, and if you take solidarity, it will make pose you as like these people who are not fighting for their rights here, but something outside much bigger. So what do you think about that? Because I feel like that sort of dilutes the crux of the movement, which is that we're fighting for larger goals like free or fellowships and these things, but it doesn't apply very well. That's
I just have this, because this problem has come repeatedly actually from, in fact our friend who was, he was also raising the similar question about how do we actually create a network of association and student bodies who can not only write solidarity statement, but can also share experiences of each other from different campuses so that the other campus can learn from our movement. Something that we have tried only for a very short period of time, but it was not consistent. It is my opinion that in Indian, all the higher educational institutions, particularly in the present time, there should be a network of student unions and student bodies. I was actually talking to him and I was trying to understand if Ambedkar Pedia study circles in all the IITs, whether they are well connected or not, whether the exchange of one campus's problem is going to the knowledge of other campus or not. Because this exchange only makes, because some campus, some students will try some different method and strategy which might be a new strategy than a method of hunger strike. I mean, I'm not saying that hunger strike is wrong, but I'm saying that sometimes we also come into fixations. There are some methods which have been going on for a long time and then nobody takes seriously, that sort of an unseriousness also comes. So in such a situation, what are the newer ways that we can approach a problem? This can only happen if we are more into the dialogue. So during the period of Justice for Rohit Vemula movement or Occupy UGC movement, we created something called All India Network of different student bodies. That I can't say that whether it was a successful exercise or not. It had its own problems. But what it did is basically, if say for example on fee hike, there has to be a national mobilization of students, then all the students' bodies at one point of time can give call that we are going to join this demand. So that actually creates this churning in different local campuses, and it becomes a national demand, national issue or national mobilization. So I think that is one way of addressing the problem. Yeah.
To your question, I want to give the example of Hyderabad Central University. Primarily, it was a science-dominated university, unlike JNU. So then there were no student organizations in operation. ABVP was Discovery, SFI was University Discussion Forum, obviously ASA existed. So like that, student organizations were creative enough to have larger links with the existing organizations outside. So I mean that way those can be explored. Yeah, you can be very subtle about your affiliation, but you can still carry on the
Many places
agitations.
actually you can't have like student organizations as such. So you can operate as discussion forum, cultural forum, whatever. The point is to have those things on. Because, okay, I'll just read a few lines from this.
AVP in IIT Delhi operates as Vivekananda Study Circle. So there are ways of how.
And IIT Madras is Vande Mataram IIT Madras.
So our Jagdish Kumar was part of in IIT Madras, part of that Vivekananda Study Circle. So they have their own ways. It's just that it becomes difficult for certain organizations who are not present. Yeah.
But there is again one question I would like to explain. There is also institutional structure which helps them a lot.
Yeah,
For
obviously.
example, Senate.
Of course.
Right. For example, like when JNU, VC was appointed, I was shocked because in 2 years of my SPPU, I never saw her in the department. Her existence was not there.
Right.
In Pune University, it was just her cabin and we used to serve, which was always locked. And it was sudden, a shock to us. Okay, that lady, she was never present in Pune University, suddenly became VC of JNU. And also the kind of this Senate and this all kind of structure helps, and it also becomes difficult for, I think, some progressive student forum, because if university is awarding doctorate to some person in convocation, it becomes problem for them, right? But of course Senate and all these people take decision to award some people this doctorate, so there it becomes actually very difficult to take a stand. So these kind of issues are actually very important when it comes to student activism in local and the state universities, where they are actually struggling. To talk it in the JNU and HCU is very easy, but to take stand where there is a regional struggle, where there is a regional conflict, linguistic conflict, where there is a syllabus kind of conflict is going, where there are professors who are involved in designing syllabus of 5 to 10 standard, or there are some like state level bodies where there is a lot of conflict, it becomes actually difficult for the student organization. And then you just have to come up like a forum, like come with the Ambedkar forum as a progressive book and try to connect the dots. But this actually this is from my experience what I observed, because person who actually fought for a mess won ABPP support, he came as a ABPP member and he became MLA in last term in Maharashtra, just within a 2 year of his journey in Pune University. So this is how it actually goes, because I think that support also matters.
Then it also talks about how strong the student movements are in different parts of the country also. Yeah. And it's my only request that we always should form bridges with progressive organizations. We might have our differences, but on a common program, if we come together, leaving out our ideological baggage, we can defeat the conservative forces. Yeah.
I had a quick question, Satarupa, as you come to read an
last
excerpt from the book. Yes. What was the major persuasion for you to make to write this book? As I gather, student movements are mostly lived, embodied, and also very specific to the university or to and they are mostly passed on as through students, one after the other. So what was the major what excited you, what pushed you towards the idea of writing this book, and what were the major reflections or takeaways from the various interviews that you guys conducted, and takeaways?
Actually, this book was not conceived as how it is now. It was supposed to be a book only on the Stand with JNU movement of 2016. But when the talk was happening, in the deliberation, we realized that JNU was not the only university which was attacked. And JNU was also not only the university from where the student movement, emerged and countered the state. It was like, a lot of universities which were simultaneously attacked and which were having like very strong resilience. Why we wrote this book is that, as I was mentioning about the role of media, the role of media is to have certain account, to fix the accountability of the government, as well as also it's a history, it creates memories, it creates certain things which you can refer when you have to go back to your past struggle. But what has been the role of media in this particular period? Absolutely ridiculous. They have not even asked this government that why are you behind students and scrapping their fellowship? Why are you not catering to the legitimate demands of the students? Like, mainstream corporate media did not raise this question. So if our channel of communication, if our medium of, if one of the mediums which is one of the fundamental body for strengthening democracy is so weakened, is so sold out, then you need to produce alternative materials for people to have an understanding of this system. So that's why the experiences of the student activists who have directly experienced problems, who have led movements, who have had the difficulty of having mobilized students, or in the process of the student movement, because everything is not so nice and gloomy. A student movement, it takes a lot of effort to build a student movement. It has sometimes you have like a meeting with some 10 people come. Sometimes it goes to 3,000. So between this 10 and 3,000, there is a lot of effort that goes for a student member to organize it. What are those processes? How the students get training to be a member of this? Like one of the friends asked this question that, how do those things happen? We have recorded some voices in this where to begin with, they were so-called apolitical students, like BHU student struggle, Mineshi Mishra, even Aishi Ghosh, who is the JNUSU president. All of them come from a background where basically they have not participated in politics. But they start identifying themselves as activists as they participate in the movement. And they have led the movement. They have faced the attacks of the hooligans and the states. So what makes this process and transform an individual from being mere a passive member of a society to an active member who will initiate a process? So this is something we try to also capture.
Even for that matter, Dr. Prashant, who rose out to become the university president, in the interview shares that he didn't want to become an activist. By chance, he got an opportunity to talk to the vice chancellor or the professor about some problems. That's how he started getting into becoming an activist. So it's a good experience. You will derive reading the interviews and going through the essays. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank
Okay. Yeah, so
Nobody
we have copies of Annihilation of Caste that we want to present to you as token of our appreciation. I request Navneeta to.
Is Annihilation of Caste, by the way, anywhere a mandatory reading in the text, apart from some of the departments?
Depends on the faculty concerned. If a faculty recommends part of his or her syllabus, it is mandatory. Yes. Hey, hello. How are you?
I think that this is the thing that we need to make certain text mandatory reading in our syllabus, and whatever push requires for that, we should do that.
The text that says
Thank
about
you.
Hinduism, sure.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so on behalf of APPSC, we want to thank the speakers to give us the time and share their experiences and also the book. And it's very timely given the kind of context that we live in, and it's very insightful and enriching to have listened to your own experience, and also the book that is very relevant for us. And we also want to thank whoever has come and joined the meeting. And also, as APPSC, we have decided to have education as an overarching theme for a series of reading sessions and discussion that we will be having in the next few months. So we'll also urge all of you to join us for the coming sessions that we'll be having. Thank you so much.
Thank you.